quality of a Fire Emblem map can be separated into 5 different factors. Flavor, how well the map matches the story and atmosphere that it is trying to portray, and whether or not it succeeds at making you feel like you're really experiencing the story as the developers intended. Objective, what the map is asking you to do in order to finish the chapter, be it seizing, routing, escaping, or defending. Is it offering you an objective that is interesting to work towards? Replayability, you finished the chapter, now how do you feel about it? Frustrated? Relieved? Satisfied? There's any number of possible outcomes that can occur after finishing a chapter, so consider whether or not you'd enjoy playing the chapter again on a subsequent playthrough. Difficulty. Difficulty might not be an important factor for everyone, but a fair amount of players yearn to be challenged by Fire Emblem, to be given a puzzle to solve with the resources provided. Was the map that you just finished difficult in a compelling way? Enjoyability. Plain and simple, is the map fun to play? Are you having a good time whilst playing it, and if so, are you able to articulate exactly why the map is so stimulating? When all of these variables are managed effectively, what you're left with is an incredibly satisfying chapter to play through, providing a memorable experience for the player that they'll hopefully be excited to enjoy again during a second playthrough. And if you don't pay attention to this formula, what you're given is some of the worst the series has to offer. My name's Blute. Welcome to F.O.R.D.E. And welcome back to F.O.R.D.E, returning with a Path of Radiance map. To those at home, did you manage to decipher the riddle that I left you at the end of last episode? Probably, because it wasn't a particularly hard anagram. Either way, Audi Wingding was in fact a Guiding Wind. Chapter 13 from Path of Radiance. A game I rather enjoy. I talked about how Sacred Stones is like overall a pretty decent package, but I'd say Path of Radiance is generally one of my favorite Fire Emblem games. Which might seem kind of strange due to the game generally not being too hard. You could actually make an argument for it being easier than Sacred Stones, but in my eyes at least, the difficulty is more enjoyable to play than Sacred Stones. Sacred Stones just feels a little bit dumb easy, what with the limitless grinding and just really, really, really strong units and enemies just being made of like wet tissue paper. Whereas Path of Radiance, the enemies don't feel horrendously weak, and they're like, your units don't feel like absolute juggernauts who can't be taken down, you know, outside of Titania. This week's map, A Guiding Wind. I really like this map. I'll just preface this episode with that now. I'm going to go ahead and just say that I believe that this map is good. We've gone from a bad map with Unbroken Heart to a good map. Now, I don't think it's a great map. I don't think it's the best map in Path of Radiance. I think there are plenty of maps better than it. I think Chapter 8 is better, just off the top of my head. Chapter 8 is better. Most of the early game is better. I actually think Path of Radiance's early game is like the tightest in the series. Like, I think those first 8 chapters are almost perfect. They're really fucking good. But, generally, I think this is a pretty solid mid-game chapter with a lot of interesting features that we will shortly go over. I would definitely classify this map as mid-game, like it's chapter 13, this is borderline halfway through the game. At this point, Path of Radiance has, I think, 29 chapters, maybe 30? At this point, you should be fully established with mechanics, and the game does not baby you at this point. It is very much not a case of, here is just a chapter to grind to your heart's content, or like, ooh, we're introducing this unit type for the first time. Have you figured out effective damage? Like, no, you know what you're doing at this point, and the chapter very much treats you like an adult. So let's just move on to good old categories. F, flavor. I actually really like this chapter's flavor. It's really, really basic, but it works. Much like Unbroken Heart, this is a rather simple chapter, but its flavor actually works quite nicely. For starters, the map is a boat map, and boat maps in Fire Emblem are like almost a bit of a meme, like a bit of a meme category. Like the majority of Fire Emblems do have a map that takes place on a ship or a galleon or what have you, and they're either really like comically boring to play, like in F.E. Echoes, where you have the Celica Chapter 2 stuff, where it's like, hey, play this boat map 6 times in a row. This is fun gameplay, this is like really interesting design by the developers. But you do also have some like genuinely good boat maps in the series, like off the top of my head, I actually do quite like the Shigure paralogue from Revelation. I actually think that's one of the better boat maps in the series. It has an interesting gimmick. A rare interesting gimmick in Revelation. Or like the Shura map in Conquest. Boat maps in general, I think, can be pretty cool. And I think the main reason is that when they create a boat map, I think that the main thing that they try to emulate is some form of chaos. For example, in this map, the chaos is represented through the ravens invading and trying to both capture the seize point when you're unaware and going for the treasures as soon as Naysala goes, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the Dayan people, so I'm just going to go ahead and steal all your shit. And that adds an interesting dynamic where you almost have red units who aren't working with each other. Like, if this was a more modern Fire Emblem, those crows would turn into yellow units, and the other red units would probably just attack the crows, which would be kind of an interesting development on that, but either way. I really like the sense of urgency the map portrays, with the fact that the defend point starts very far away from you, and the green units are kind of like flailing to protect it, because the green units present on the map, including Astrid, are very weak and will die very quickly, most likely, unless you really want to defend them. And you start reasonably far away, so there's like a real sense of desperation as you go into the map. And it almost feels like the green units have been fighting for a really long time. It's like, oh shit, we gotta get in there quick. And that is portrayed really well through gameplay, as well as the game really, really wants you to play quickly, as we'll get into later, but I think that's represented really, really nicely. The game also introduces a ton of new characters with this, with Astrid, the Benyon Knights introduced properly for the first time, Nesala's first appearance, Tibon's first appearance. And the introductions are spaced really, really nicely, to the point where they don't feel super intrusive. It's like a nice short little bit of dialogue every 2 turns or so, where it's like Nesala talking to the boss, or Tibon scouting from afar, or the Benyon Knights coming in at the very end, or like Astrid being introduced. It just feels really natural. It doesn't feel like really clunky exposition. It just feels like a natural progression of these characters being slowly introduced. Yeah, overall, I think this chapter absolutely fucking nails the flavor. It succeeds at integrating the gameplay and the story really nicely, with that sense of desperation of rushing to the aid of the green units to make sure that they don't get like absolutely demolished by the litany of red units that are invading their boat. The characters all feel natural. The introductions don't feel over the top. It works. It works really nicely. It's simple, but it works very effectively. Big thumbs up for flavor. As for objective, our good old brother in O, it's a mixed bag, honestly, which is unfortunate. The map is defend/route, and that big /route is the part I have an issue with. I really, really like defend maps. Defend maps are generally my favorite objective to play, because they're very infrequent. Some Fire Emblem maps straight up don't even have defend as an objective. I'm looking at you, FE6. I fucking love seizing. I love seizing for 25 to 30 chapters. It's a joy. FE9 actually has has 3 defend maps. I think this is the last one. Chapter 8, Chapter 5, and this. And I do actually really like Chapter 5 and 8 as far as defend maps go. This one's probably the weakest of the defend maps in terms of actually defending, because of that big /route next to defend. This isn't really a defend map, per se. I'd say it's defend for like the first 3 chapters, and then after that, you've kind of like seized control of what's going on. You've started to win the tug of war in terms of unit density and unit strength. Because one of the biggest problems with a lot of defend maps in the series is that they're not actually defend for the most part. Like, a defend map that is completely just defend for the most part, because you don't really have the units or the resources to like absolutely swarm the enemy and play hyper aggressively, is like Chapter 14 from Thrashia. You do need to play defensive on that map, because you are surrounded by ballista, the reinforcements are ludicrous. After a certain point, I want to say like 20 dark mages come in, and it's just like, well, yeah, I ain't dealing with those cultists, I'm going home. For another random defend chapter, like Chapter 10 in Conquest, which is a very, very good map, and I would love to talk about that someday, but regardless, the best way to beat that map, as I have discovered after playing through it many, many times, is to just play hyper aggressively and make sure that the units can't swarm you, because the best defense is a good offense. Which is kind of a bummer, because I actually do really like tactically defending from hordes of enemies, making choke points, making like improvised defenses to make sure that they stay out. So the fact that in this map especially, the best thing to do is basically just rush the enemy ship with your units once you've like held off the choke points for around 2 to 3 turns, and you've like staunched the flow of enemies and made sure the green units aren't just gonna fall over and die, and you got the defense point, or you got the defend point like properly covered up from the crows. At that point, you're basically fine, and you will just kind of go full Unga Bunga on the enemy, which is a shame, but at the end of the day, if it works, why change the strategy, you know? So while defend is a cool objective, and it is portrayed, or like it is represented relatively well in the beginning, as soon as you get going, there isn't enough enemies, or the enemies aren't strong enough, or a combination of the two, to the point where you don't need to play defensive anymore, and if you do play defensive and just kind of sit still and wait for the enemies to just like slowly try and whittle down Gatry and Titania and Oscar and whatnot, your defensive units, the rest of your units aren't really doing anything, and it can feel very inefficient and just kind of dull. So like, playing aggressively is also more fun in that way, because a lot of your units just won't have very much to do because of one tile choke points, which we'll get into in a bit. But for now, I'm really wondering if it does succeed in its objective. I'm like genuinely torn. It definitely succeeds on flavor. It doesn't succeed on a couple of other aspects, but we'll get to those. I'm gonna be generous and say it does succeed an objective, because you do actually have to keep an eye out for the defend point, because ravens can just swoop in and capture it while you're being kind of complacent, which, you know, that situation absolutely has happened to me before. I have, like, completely failed to pay attention to the ravens and just assumed they would either steal shit or go for my units, and one just went on woo and swooped into the cabin, pecked the apostle to death, and whoops, that's a game over. That's how I learned that ravens will go for the objective. So at the end, you do still have to defend. I'm going to be very generous and say it does succeed. But if I could give, like, a maybe for a rating, this one would definitely get it, rather than just an absolute yes. And that'll move us on to probably, maybe, it's one of the chapter's weakest aspects in its replayability. It's quite weak, for the most part. Replayability is kind of a difficult one to succeed at, because the entire category as a whole is, would I look forward to playing this chapter again on a subsequent playthrough? Is there enough variety and versatility in the game's mechanics and the chapter's like gimmicks and objectives and some such to make me interested? And I'd say this chapter kind of falls flat in that regard, as the majority of your actions will be mostly the same in between playthroughs, because of a thing I mentioned earlier, with one-tile choke points. As previously mentioned, the first few turns are basically always going to turn out the same, and that you will just hurry your troops, you'll just go run to the middle ship, and you will promptly put your tankiest units into the choke points, namely probably Gatry, one of your paladins if you have multiple at this point, like a Kieran or an Oscar, and Titania probably, to choke the 3 choke points. And at that point, enemies will just continually run at them until they die, because they do no damage to them, and the enemy forces are generally just depleted at that point, and you rush the ship to finish off the chapter. Very simple. And that's where the chapter really just becomes a bit paint by numbers, much like Unbroken Heart, in that this is both the optimal way to play the chapter and the most obvious way to play the chapter. Like, some maps do have optimal ways to play the chapter that are a little bit like, huh, really? I didn't think the optimal way to play Chapter 10 in Conquest was to play aggressive. I thought it's like, no, I have to defend this line, otherwise I'm gonna get swarmed by the enemy. And then as soon as I started playing aggressive, I'm like, holy shit, this completely changes the chapter. But here, like, this is absolutely, like, right from the get-go, even if you're a newer player, it just does kind of feel correct to go, oh, I'll just place my tanky unit here so he blocks off all of the enemy units from swarming my less fortuitous units. This makes sense. And that's the issue with one-tile choke points, because it's a put square peg into square hole solution, and it's very, very simple. When choke points are increased to, say, 2 to 3 tiles, you are forced to improvise, as you'll have to account for enemies attacking multiple units, some of whom are not going to be cut out for taking hits. So it creates an interesting dynamic where on multiple playthroughs you will have different units tanking these points, because 2 to 3 choke points can allow for some variability and some random chance, which makes the game more interesting to play, in my opinion. Here, though, it's literally just going to be Gatry and your tankiest units tanking those points, but anywhere from, like, 6 to 10 hits, I want to say, which is insanely tanky, and you won't even really need to worry about keeping them topped up with your healers. Yeah, it's difficult to really say that the map will have anything truly unique to look forward to on a second playthrough, compared to a chapter like 14, for instance, 14 directly after this, which is an incredibly simple chapter, but for me at least, feels a little bit different each time you play it, due to the nature of the side objectives and Fog of War. So you're not entirely sure, unless you're looking at outside resources, you're never entirely sure what's going on the map, because enemies will be obscured by fog, and brigands will be going for houses, which do have good stuff in them. There's Makalov you have to worry about. There's a lot of stuff going on in 14, which is like minor, but there's a lot of minor side objectives which work quite well. Here, though, the map does have side objectives, and good ones too, which we will get to. They are positioned in such a way that you can effectively just complete the chapter before you've even started playing it, as the most difficult part of the map is just making sure the green unit AI doesn't go berserk and position themselves poorly. Once you pass this hurdle, the rest of the chapter basically plays out exactly the way you want it to. It fails pretty hard on replayability, unfortunately. It's not a perfect chapter. And speaking of things that aren't perfect, is the difficulty. Yeah, this is definitely the chapter's weakest aspect. Path of Radiance is a pretty easy game overall, and outside of the previously mentioned ravens just swooping in unannounced, there really isn't anything that dangerous to watch out for. The majority of the enemies are still unpromoted, so the stats won't be anything to write home about. The enemies that are promoted, I believe, don't even move, like the Halberdiers and the boss Norris does not move at all. And weirdly enough, there's no reinforcements at all on this map. Like, there's no one hiding below decks or anything, so what you see is what you get. So the enemy density is actually going to be quite, like, reasonable for a defend map, which is kind of defeats the purpose of a defend map, is you're being absolutely hounded by constant enemy reinforcements. And I want to say the boss is the only sniper boss in the entire game, and I'm pretty sure the reason he's the only sniper boss in the entire game is because the devs quickly realized that making the boss have no form of one range makes him incredibly easy to bully. Ah yes, I'm going to cage them in and just slowly whittle you down so I can train Mia, my 7 strength Mia. She will become a queen! I'd actually say the most difficult part of the map, as I said, is just turn 1, because if you're unaware of the shove and smiting strategy to get Ike in position so he can recruit Astrid and Gatry on turn 1, and limit the amount of, like, fuckery the green units can do, green unit AI can be potentially frustrating as you don't know what they're going to do. I can think of a lot of chapters with green units that I would absolutely dread Iron Manning, like Living Legend in FE7. I've seen Pent die in that chapter way more often than he should, and Battle Before Dawn makes me lose sleep at night. Whereas here, it's like, it can be potentially bad, but like the chances are really unlikely. I'm gonna give this one a big old fail as well, purely just because it's a really, really easy fix for the chapter as well. Like, it's not a case of like, oh, you need to completely rework the map and make this enemy this and this enemy that. Like, you could just make this chapter a way more challenging just by either increasing the enemies or just making them stronger, or both. Really simple solution. It's probably way harder on Maniac mode. And now we move on to E! Enjoyability. Now, I might sound kind of crazy here, but I genuinely always enjoy playing this map. Regardless of difficulty, regardless of like how replayable it is, regardless of how good my units are, or whether or not I'm Iron Manning, I think this chapter is an absolute blast to play through. For one main reason. I mentioned the chest distribution in Unbroken Heart and how it was really, like, bland and unexciting and doesn't really add anything to the map, as there's no tension of your potential treasure being stolen by thieves or such similar enemies. You just go up into the room at the very start of the map, you grab your crap, and you're done. That's it. The side objective is done, you just need to worry about routing the rest of the map, which is why that map is so dull. Here, though, it's completely different, as the 7 chests that are spread across the map are the heart and soul of the chapter. If this map had no chests, the chapter would be way less interesting to play. For starters, the crows that appear from around turn 5, I believe, onwards, will just gun it for those chests as soon as Naysala gives the order, which is way more threatening than traditional thieves, because these bastards can fly, and they have an escape point that is completely out of reach of the majority of your army. So in the situation where they do manage to snag one of those items, you need to deal with them the turn they get it, or they are gone. This sense of urgency is also helped by the really, really simple fact that the items in these chests are good. They're really fucking good. The 2 best items you can get are both stat boosters. There's an energy drop and a speed wing, which means that your 2 best items are the 2 godlike stat boosters, the 2 that give the most valuable stats in the game, strength and speed, along with some reasonably okay weapons. Like, the worst is a longsword, which is crap, but the rest are like pretty good. I think there's a killer bow, which is nice, and an occult scroll, all of which are spread out in a way that I am astonished isn't used more often, as what they do is really, really simple. The best items, aka the boosters, are the most difficult items to get, positioned the farthest away from your army on the enemy ship in the top right. Meaning that if you don't play aggressively and sprint towards those top right chests as quickly as possible, the Ravens are going to get there first. Simple as that. This race for the items is what makes the map, straight up. It is just an absolute joy to play it because of that. Blocking choke points is pretty standard defensive gameplay, which can be fun on occasion, but it's really not that interesting here, especially when it's just paired with the usual, oh, I'll just kill the enemy, that's my tactic. But having this, like, kind of strange manic rush for the loot, and loot that actually makes a difference to your army. Like, it's not just some random crap like an antitoxin or an elixir or a steel sword that I don't care about. Like, it is actually meaningful items. The fact that you have this manic rush turns an otherwise average chapter, in my opinion, into a great map. Perhaps not an excellent one, but, like, legitimately, this is one of my favorite maps in Path of Radiance because of this, like, because of this supermarket sweep-esque rush to get the amazing treasures. A guiding one isn't perfect, and I definitely understand if someone told me that all of the aspects of the map that I like are actually flawed and stinky. 3 out of 5 letters ain't bad, perhaps 2.5, but either way, especially considering there are some junk chapters in Path of Radiance. Hell, the one before this is absolute junk. Chapter 12. The one where, the Raven introduction chapter before the proper Raven introduction chapter, where you're just fighting, like, the random rogue Ravens who single file just go into your ship and then die. That chapter's awful. That's just a filler chapter. It's fucking junk. Regardless, I'd classify this as a good map. At the very least, better than Unbroken Heart. And one of the better maps in Path of Radiance. And that'll wrap it up for this week's episode of F.O.R.D.E. Thank you very much for joining me. Always a delight to have these. These are really fun to make. It's just really nice to have, like, a quick chat about a map. the next chapter we'll be talking about is already locked in, as I've said. The first 3 episodes have been locked in already. But after that, I really would appreciate some suggestions. If you really want me to talk about Shadow Dragon Chapter 4, or how about Engage Chapter 16, please leave a comment below. I'll give it a look, and I'll do my best to pick the interesting ones, or perhaps the less interesting ones, as I would like to talk about basically every map if I'm given the opportunity. Either way, really looking forward to whatever you guys have to say. As for the next episode, your anagram for the next episode, I will keep doing these, even if it's dorky, it's fun, and fun is the most important factor of all. Remember, kids, if it ain't fun, why do it? Regardless, the anagram for the next episode, for those in the back, acing mafiosos. The anagram is acing mafiosos. Alright, that's me done for this week. I will catch you guys next time. Have a great one, everyone. I'll see you around.